Would please help me welcome a very, very dear friend of mine. He's done a lot in his short lifetime, up until this point, shorter than mine, and he might even have a more impressive and longer resume. He's been a contributor writer to the Conway Daily Sun and the Weir's Times. He's been a guest on WLOB in Portland on the radio, as well as WEZS in Laconia on the Advocates radio show, and also the Vice-President of the Constitutional Awareness PAC, my good friend, Isaac Hadam.
Well, thank you very much. I need to take you everywhere I go for an introduction like that. If I seem a little bit discombobulated in the speech, it's not at all, don't worry. But with that round of applause, you guys might be over-expecting on this speech. But no, I will do my best to deliver a great speech, and I think I have some stuff that's important to talk about. It's always great when I have people encouraging me in my speech. I was talking to Caleb shortly before the event began, and talking about introducing people and speaking and stuff, and he said, I was going to tell a joke, and I thought, actually, I'll just introduce you. So I'm appreciative of people who encourage you, and I'm appreciative of all you guys taking the time out. It is not lost on me that you are giving up some valuable personal time to come out to this event, and we truly, truly appreciate it. I want to talk today about one of the most attacked sections in our Constitution today. Now, several of them are very attacked and maligned, but the Second Amendment, especially in recent years, has come under significant attack. And one of the things that I've noticed is that within the past couple of years, the quote-unquote solutions have become more and more radical. Things that are being said today by mainstream people on a consistent basis, I don't think were being said even 5 or 10 years ago by mainstream people on a consistent basis. So I want to talk about the purpose of the Second Amendment, why we have the Second Amendment, because it's important, as these shootings are terrible things, but it's important that as we look to address them and fight back against them, that we know the basis of why we have the Second Amendment. Because if we can understand why we have the Second Amendment, we will then respect it, and then as we try to combat these shootings, we will go, how do we combat these shootings without stepping on law-abiding citizens' constitutional liberties? Just like if you were going to do a law that regarded freedom of speech, you'd want to know the foundational premises and understanding of the First Amendment, so that then you'd be able to respect it and address it with legislation accordingly that would not step on people's First Amendment freedom of speech. And these attacks on the Second Amendment are widespread. The late Supreme Court Justice John Paul Stevens wrote an op-ed just last year in which he called for a complete abolition, a repeal of the Second Amendment. He called the Second Amendment a, quote, relic of the 18th century, unquote. An Economist and YouGov poll conducted just last year showed 21% of Americans support a repeal of the Second Amendment. An article appearing in The Hill just this past month ran with the title, Repeal the Second Amendment to Save Americans from Gun Violence. In this article, the author called for a repeal of the Second Amendment and said that Congress needs to pass universal background checks, bans on assault weapons, whatever you want to define an assault weapon as, bans on high-capacity magazines, extended rating periods, safe storage and red flag laws, and gun registration requirements. These have been echoed by people such as former Texas Congressman and 2020 presidential candidate Beto O'Rourke, who has called for a gun registry and licensing of every American who owns a firearm, as well as the mandatory gun buyback of weapons such as AR-15s. So these attacks are very prevalent in our society today, and they all stem, unfortunately, from what I believe is a missing of the point of why we have the Second Amendment. This is borne out in that article that I mentioned in The Hill, where the author accused pro-gun people such as the NRA, he said that they, quote, reinvent the Second Amendment and distort its meaning to claim a virtually unlimited citizen right to keep and bear arms. So he's saying that when we say that the Second Amendment protects individual right to keep and bear arms, he's saying that's reinventing the Second Amendment. I would argue that that argument is a reinventing of the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment was given to we the people so that law-abiding citizens could protect themselves, their families, their property, and most importantly, their liberty from harm, no matter the source of that harm. And this is proven in two ways, because it's important if we're going to interpret the Constitution, you need to interpret it as written with backdrop given by the framers themselves. This idea that the Constitution is a living, breathing document and the words can change with time is ridiculous. You wouldn't do it with a person's last will and testament. You'd try to read a person's last will as written, and you certainly should not be doing it with the supreme law of the land, the U.S. Constitution. So there are two ways that we see why the Second Amendment was given to us. And one is by the Founding Fathers' own words. The second one is through the historical context of that, for those Founding Fathers' words. So the Founding Fathers' own words. I'm going to start with a couple of quotes from our founders that start off by just showing that the founders intended the American people to keep and bear arms. James Madison, the father of the Constitution, in the Federalist Papers wrote that the Constitution preserves, quote, "the advantage of being armed which Americans possess over the people of almost every other nation," unquote. Samuel Adams said that the Constitution should not be construed to allow Congress to, quote, "prevent the people of the United States who are peaceable citizens from keeping their own arms." So these two quotes right off the bat show that the Constitution does preserve an individual right to keep and bear arms, as Samuel Adams said, for law-abiding citizens. But now what about the purpose? Why did they expect the American people to keep and bear arms? That's borne out in these quotes here. Thomas Jefferson, a man who truly needs no introduction, wrote, quote, "And what country can preserve its liberties if their rulers are not warned from time to time that their people preserve the spirit of resistance? Let them take arms." Roger Sherman, a senator from Connecticut, the author of the Grand Compromise at the Constitutional Convention, and really, I think, a underrated and underappreciated founding father, said, quote, "conceived it to be the privilege of every citizen and one of his most essential rights to bear arms and to resist every attack upon his liberty or property by whomsoever made." The privilege of every citizen and one of his most essential rights to bear arms and to resist every attack upon his liberty or property by whomsoever made. The Founding Fathers understood that the reason we had the Second Amendment was to preserve our liberty. And this leads into the second point of historical context. The Second Amendment was ratified in 1791, less than 10 years since the Revolutionary War. To the Founding Fathers, the idea of a tyrannical government was not an abstract, far-fetched thought. They had just fought one. They had just experienced an extended Revolutionary War fighting against a tyrannical king. And they had seen a group of individual citizens with guns in their home coming together to form an army to defeat the most powerful empire at that time on the face of the earth. Hunting was not the point of the Second Amendment. In 1791, hunting was a necessity for most people. You could not go down to the local Hannaford or the local Walmart and buy the food that you needed. You needed to be able to hunt. That was especially if you were on the frontier. That was an absolute necessity. So we see here, and this is by no means an in-depth. It is hard for one to package into 10 to 15 minutes an in-depth speech about why we have the Second Amendment. But in just the most basic terms, we see the founders' own words expressing that we, the people who are law-abiding citizens, should be able to keep and bear arms to preserve our liberty and to protect ourselves. And that is, once again, through the historical context, because they had seen what tyranny that tyranny on people without the people having an ability to answer that tyranny, the people had no recourse. So they understood a last redress should be the keeping and bearing of arms. And you can see this even today. Look at nations like Venezuela, where the people have been disarmed, and now a tyrannical government is walking over them, and they have nothing to do to stop. Hong Kong is on edge because a tyrannical government is prepared to quash liberty. There is truly nothing new under the sun. And so it is important, as we are addressing these shootings, these terrible things that occur, and as we look to try to stop them, we need to come back and start from the same foundation. Because, as I said at the beginning, if we're not starting from the same foundation, if we're not starting with an understanding of why we have the Second Amendment, if we're not starting with the understanding of how important the Second Amendment is, we will not be afraid to take away constitutional liberties from law-abiding citizens. So, I hope, in a very brief speech, I have been able to lay out very basic groundworks about why we have the Second Amendment, why it is important, and why each and every one of us must do our best to protect and preserve it for any law-abiding citizen. Thank you very much.